Hello and welcome to Loving Me, Myself, and Life with me, Joni Misiak. Today we're going to talk about something super important for any relationship. Romantic, friend, child, parents, everything. It's called communication. We need communication. Here's a fun fact. People can't read your mind. Now, I can read my kids' minds some of the time. Actually, no, I can't. I can read their facial expressions. One, I know when they're lying to me. I know, I know some of their tells. And even my husband, I can tell certain things. I'm like, okay, I know what's going on. But I can't actually I can't hear their thoughts. But I can see some of their expressions give themselves away, or their tone in their voice. I know when people are sad and things like that. But we can't, we're not in there. We're not in your brain. We're not in your thoughts. So communication is super important for any relationship. And it really comes down to just taking the time to slow down. And what I've learned, or not learned, what I've discovered over the past few years, maybe more, since text messaging has become the norm instead of phone calls and emails, it can be hard to communicate via text or email. Because sometimes you say something jokingly, but in written form, people will read it in their own tone, not what you interpret it, what you put out there. So sometimes it's just better to pick up the phone and have a conversation, or face-to-face conversation. If they're big conversations, talking face-to-face, or at least pick up the phone, so important, because half of what we say is actually in our tone. So remember that when you need to have a conversation. And another one is since I've become a parent, it can be challenging on your relationship with your partner. At least for me, it has. And over these past couple of years, my husband and I work in the same house. We work together. We don't work together. We work in the same house. And we can see each other a lot. But it's not always communicating, we have to have conversations, not just talking about randomness, the weather. It's having deep conversations and communication and being honest. And, it's really, really honest with ourselves and with the people in our life. So for us, what has worked is, I've mentioned this in a different episode, I think, but we have check-ins where we check in the morning. Sometimes we used to check in the afternoon, but because our kids get home from school so early, that's pretty much when we check in, is before we pick up the kids, or before I go pick up the kids, or before he picks up the kids. We have a check-in usually. And we also try to check in before, my husband goes to bed so early because he gets up so early for work. So he does a check-in. We usually check in. But if we didn't, we'd have no idea what was going on with each other most of the day, even though we live in the same house, work in the same house. We don't always get a chance to have those conversations. So we had to make time for these conversations, especially with being parents. And, we have life. Life happens and it's going on. So, and then every so often, we try and get out of the house, away from our responsibilities as a parent, as taking care of a house and job and just everything. We try to get out of our environment and have conversations that aren't just around our tasks, our responsibilities. We try to have them as people and, adults, and really just have meaningful conversation. So communication is just so important. So if you're feeling something, don't expect somebody else to know what you're thinking. It's having, be go out for coffee, share with them what you're feeling or thinking, or pick up the phone. Text messaging is great. I use text messaging all the time. Same with email. It's the best way to get a hold of me is email me or text me. But some conversations are better in person. Even making plans with a friend. I will go out of my way to go run into friend. I will go out of my way to actually talk to a friend in person to make plans and stuff like that, because it's easier than texting a million times. Or even I've had friends call me because they want to have a conversation not just a text message like messaging chain of texts. Like we want to actually hear voices, like hear people's voices. So communication is so important. And the reason I actually brought this up is because my husband was going to an event with our youngest, and the day before I'm like, well, do you know where you're meeting this? Like, because he was carpooling with somebody, he was driving. I was like, do you know where you're meeting this person or who you're even driving or any of this stuff? And he's like trying to text the night before and figure it out. And it's like, wow, like communication is so important. Like you don't know the details unless you ask the questions. And, that just scratches the surface of communication. Like it's just a very light communication. But at the same time, like if he didn't know where to pick up, he didn't know what time to leave the house in the morning. So, because they had to catch the ferry. So it was just like an eye-opening moment. It was one of those moments like life reminds me that the importance of certain things. And I used life as a way to figure out topics for the podcast. I'm like, oh, communication. So if you have an important, thing you want to share with somebody or you need to meet up with somebody, communication is very, very important because we can't read people's minds. We can't, predict the future. We have it's about talking back and forth. And I feel like these past couple of years might have changed things of how we communicate. Maybe we got sick of FaceTime and things like that. I know our kids can't even do video chatting anymore. They're like, oh my goodness, I don't want to be on this thing. Even though we have family far away and that's how they're communicating with family. I feel like we're getting burnt out about different things. So it's really important to remember the root. Like what does it come back to? And it's having a conversation and communicating how we're feeling, what we need, maybe what we don't need, and allowing ourselves to be ourselves through it all. So I just had this random reminder, about what happened. We had a thing where there's a conversation happening between a scout leader and my husband. It was a scout leader between my oldest. A conversation between my oldest and a scout leader. And the scout leader was explaining why they couldn't do something. And inside, my oldest was just like, I wanted to yell at them, but our children know better not to yell at authority figures. But at the same time, it's teaching them that they can still voice their opinion. We need to share how we feel, but we don't have to be yelling and screaming in somebody's face. We don't have to be mean about it either. We can openly be honest about how we're feeling and how it bothers us, and we can do it in a nice, loving way. My big thing is lead with love. So it's okay, this is frustrating me. Now, luckily, we were able to work through the situation, and my oldest was able to share frustrations with me, and I'm like, oh, I'm frustrated about the situation too, and we all work through it. The thing is, though, if we forget our voice, then people don't know what we're thinking and feeling. If we don't use our voice. And it's just remembering to be gentle and loving. The other person on the other side of the conversation is human too and has feelings. So don't need to yell and put them down or you make me feel like this. And we don't have to yell and shout and things like that. So what my daughter did about not saying anything was probably the best situation at that time. Only because the emotions were so high, it would have only came out as anger. So sometimes we can't say something because we know we can't calm ourselves down enough to say it. It's getting centered, and then but you make sure you got to follow through on that conversation, because then time goes by and it gets forgotten, and then that whatever happened could come up again. So luckily, what happened with the situation, we were all able to work through it, and things like that. And we never. And I even shared with my daughter about working through it. That's great that you didn't yell at your leaders. That's really good. The thing is though, like if you're feeling angry, we got to work through it. And, I was sharing, like I said, I was sharing my own frustrations. I'm like, yes, I'm frustrated too. I wasn't there at the time, so I couldn't even voice my frustrations. But like I said, we all worked from a family. We all got through it and we worked through the problem together. We worked through our frustrations and we found a solution. So that's really important. We figured out what the problem is, why we couldn't do something, and then come up with and problem solve together to make it happen. So like we could have just let that go. The situation that happened, we could have just let it go. Or we could have got mad about the situation, then never came up with a solution. So sometimes when you get upset and mad, maybe like if you're going to be mean to somebody, take a minute. But I'm definitely not one about saying like push it down, because if you hang on to feelings, they just manifest somewhere else in your body. So it's very important to voice your concerns, feel them and all that stuff. But if you're going to hurt somebody else in the process, take a minute to process it yourself and to come at it from a better place. And then you can come up with better, awesome solutions. So I've kind of got off on a little bit more of a topic than I planned, but it's super important. Communication is super, super important. So if you have somebody in your life where you just feel like wires are getting crossed, or you just don't feel like you're being heard, share that. I know I have that with my husband, where I'm like, oh, like we're not connecting, and like I share my concerns. I'm like, we're not connecting right now. I'm like, or I don't feel like I'm being heard, things like that. So it is really important to voice your thoughts, your feelings, and your concerns, and trying your best to come from a place of love. Sometimes I'm not in a mood and I'm just like, I can't talk about this right now. I need to process it myself and then I'll come back. So sometimes remember, it's leading with love. Just because you're feeling things doesn't mean you have to get mad at the person on the other end or put your feelings onto somebody else. But it is super important for you to share how you're feeling when you feel it's comfortable, and that you're not going to like take it out on somebody else, especially if it's the wrong person. Like, is when you reflect your feelings onto somebody else and just a transfer, you might be mad at somebody, but the other person's in the crosshairs. But if somebody is bothering you, tell them. Like I remember when I was in college, I didn't like to rock the boat. I still don't really like to rock the boat, but those boats need to rock. Like if you're feeling something, you got to feel like, So when I was in college, I had a roommate that his course load must have been fairly light, or I don't know. He always seemed to be home playing video games. But I was like pulling all-nighters. I had a really crazy workload. And, I'd still come home and I'd do the dishes. And there was times where I didn't even, like the dishes were piling up, or we had no clean dishes, or the bathroom. Actually, the bathroom got so bad. He did do the bathroom. Yay. But I remember complaining to my friends about him. Like, he's never doing this and he's never doing that. My poor friends, they had nothing to do with this. They weren't the ones not doing the dishes, but they heard me constantly complaining about my roommate. What I should have done, now that I know better, because when we know better, we can do better. What I should have done was have a conversation with him. Not when I was mad about it, like when I got home and I'm like, gah. But when I was like at a place of calmness and be like, look, we both live here. We can both do the dishes. And like we could have came up with a schedule, or we could have figured out something. But I should have had a conversation. Not a yelling match. Not a like rah and like yell at him for not doing it. But a conversation. Like, look, when you're not doing the dishes, it makes me feel frustrated. Or whatever. Like, so it's having those conversations. And I, out of everybody, understand how hard it can be to have these conversations. But looking back now, it would have been easier to have that 5-minute conversation or less, instead of like weeks or months or whatever I was complaining to my friends. I could have been enjoying my friends and having a good time instead of complaining about the dishes. So communication, so important in every area of our lives, including roommates. So I hope this has helped. Communicate. And that goes for me too. If you have a topic you want to hear me talk about, you're like, oh, she never talks about this, or I really want to hear her talk about this, email me. And I would love to talk about any of the frustration challenges you have. My email address is info@jodymisiak.com. I'd love to hear from you because communication is so important. I love to hear what you love, what you don't love. Maybe I overshare. Well, that's never changing. I'm going to overshare probably all the time. Unapologetically being myself. Anyways, reach out. Communicate to myself. Communicate to the people in your life. They matter. You matter. And it's really important to communicate all your feelings and thoughts with others in your life because they want to know how you're feeling. And I mean really feeling. They want to know. Let them in. Communicate. Lead with love. And have a beautiful, beautiful day. Bye for now.